Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Saskia de Vilder. I'm from GNS Science, and I'm presenting today on behalf of my co-authors who can't be here, particularly Marc-Andre Bordeaux, who was our project lead for this research, as well as Chris Massey, Andrew Mitchell, Scott McDougall, Jordan Aaron, and Biljana Lukovic. And what I wanted to talk about today is how we've used empirical runout relationships to estimate the potential runout distance of landslides, associated impact area, and how we've used these probability of runout exceedance within landslide hazard and risk analysis, particularly at a regional scale. So what we've done is we've compiled the different landslide types and then different materials. We've compiled examples from published literature, both internationally and in New Zealand, as well as unpublished New Zealand examples. And we've created empirical data sets for four, different landslide types. So for dry or seismically triggered open slope debris avalanches and rock avalanches, for rock avalanches that travel out on glaciers versus on unglaciated terrain, wet or rainfall triggered open slope debris avalanches, and wet or rainfall triggered channelized debris flows. And we've calculated the tangent of their fall height but to their horizontal runout distance, their Fabrishong angle for each of these landslide types. And this has a correlation with landslide volume. So smaller landslides have a lower mobility, whereas larger landslides have a higher mobility. And we can see that on the examples here on the right. And from these empirical relationships, as the tangent of H over L versus volume, we can best fit linear regression relationships in log-log space for each landslide type. And these best fit linear regressions allow us to determine runout exceedance probability. So they allow us to determine the 50% runout exceedance probability line, something like the 90% or something greater than 10% by basically fitting that best fit line as well as our confidence intervals either side of that. So we can use this runout exceedance probability within our regional scale hazard and risk analyses. So what I wanted to do now was just go through the relationships for our four different landslide types, our four different broad landslide types, and then show you an example of how we've applied this in Kaikoura. So the first broad landslide type we looked at was dry debris avalanches and rock avalanches that can be seismically triggered. And we make a link that in earthquake conditions, these might be dry landslides. So we compiled data sets from the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake, the Canterbury earthquake sequence in 2010-2011, as well as some other New Zealand examples, and we compared them with international literature. And we found that there's a change in mobility in landslides that occurs at volumes between 100,000 meters cubed and 1 million meters cubed. So what we did is we made the distinction. So we fitted a debris avalanche runout relationship to volumes less than 100,000 cubic meters, and then we fitted a rock avalanche runout relationship to volumes greater than that. We then compared this rock avalanche relationship with a compilation of rock avalanches that have traveled over glaciers, which was put together by Delane et al. In 2014, to look at the differences that substrate path can have on landslide mobility. And we see that landslides that travel out over glaciers, so over ice and incorporate snow and ice and meltwater and wet sediments from the glacier, have a higher mobility as determined by layer gradient on the graph than compared with rock avalanches that occur and travel over unglaciated terrain. We also compiled data on wet or rainfall triggered open slope debris avalanches from around the world for a variety of source materials. So for till, for wetted granite in Hong Kong, and for wetted greywacke and bedrock alluvium in New Zealand. And we see, if we compare with our dry or seismically triggered debris avalanches, that these wet debris avalanches have a greater mobility and travel further for similar volumes. We then did the same again for rainfall triggered debris flows. This is when we only included data that was significantly confined over its travel path, and we excluded lahars. And we see that confined landslides travel further than open slope landslides. And then again, they're wet, so they again travel further. So we had these 4 main data sets, I guess, and we then tried to apply this on a regional scale. So we wanted to provide researchers and practitioners with simple tools in which to conduct forward-looking empirical probabilistic runout analysis for debris avalanches, rock avalanches, and debris flows. And so I'm just going to show you an example now where we've applied this for the Kaikoura District Council for their land use planning purposes. So here's a study area of Kaikoura. This is area was affected by landsliding during the 2016 earthquake. And then basically the area that we are concerned with landslide impact is in this kind of pink purple color. So to try and carry out this empirical runout methodology on a regional scale, we had 3 broad different steps. First of all is to identify potential landslide source areas. So where in the region can different landslide volumes and different landslide types occur? And then from identifying these potential source areas, we carried out wet and open slope, dry and wet debris avalanche and rock avalanche runout modeling, as well as debris flow runout modeling. So the first step basically is the source area identification screening stage. So we only consider slope angles greater than 20 degrees. And then we used 2 different metrics to try and screen our slopes. We looked at local slope relief and we looked at area to volume scaling relationships. So for local slope relief, what we mean is basically not the slope in total, but that local slope within a radius that determines the size of our slope. And we use data from landslides triggered by the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake, as published in Massey et al. 2020. And basically what we wanted to do is say that only large slopes can generate large landslides. So how do we screen these slopes? So from the different landslide volumes from this data set, we could look at the local slope relief relationships, so that smaller landslides occur at smaller local slope reliefs, whereas larger landslides occur for bigger slopes. So we use this relationship for the different volume classes to screen our slopes. But then we also realized that we had to have another step, basically because 2 slopes can have a similar local slope relief, but their shape means they can't actually generate a landslide. So for example, here's slope 1 and slope 2. So slope 1 can't generate a landslide of that size because of its morphology. So the second step that we did is we then used area to volume scaling relationships to try and figure out what was the area of slope that could actually generate a landslide. And we used data again from Kaikoura and from a different Massey et al. 2020 paper, and we looked at this area to volume scaling relationship. So we used that and applied that as a second step in our screening. So once we'd come up with this, we created a GIS runout model, and that used the Fabergé method and used, I guess, the methodology or the ethos of the ArcGIS visibility tool to calculate runout distance from our identified source areas for the different landslide volumes. So it looked down slope and projected the Fabergé angle down slope. We also built in obstacle heights. So in some cases, to avoid runout stopping at small steps in the landscape, we had permissible obstacle heights, and the runout would only stop if the runout was greater than if the obstacle height was greater than that allowed. And this obstacle height was scaled with landslide volumes. So smaller volumes could stop at smaller obstacle heights. And we created maps of landslide runout for the different volume classes. So in this map here, we have the landslide source areas or potential source locations for 10 and 100 meter cube landslides. And then the landslide runout polygons are basically in blue. And I'm just going to start stepping through the different volume classes. So we go up to 1,000, you can start to see the landslide runout. 10,000 is more of the runout. 100,000, and you can also see that the landslide runout areas, landslide source areas start to get smaller. So not all the slopes can start to generate these big volumes. And then we go up to 1 million cubic meters. So that's what we did for open slope debris avalanches. In this example, it's the earthquake triggered for dry debris avalanche, but you can do the same for wet. We did something slightly different for debris flows. We looked and mapped fans across the project area, so it was about 250 fans across the project areas, and then we used melt-in ratios and catchment orders to determine if debris flood, or debris flow processes dominated. So we classified our fans. We then ran the same kind of runout tool, but what we did, instead of generating an area, it just generates a line, so it takes the lowest point and the relief. So from that line, we then extrapolate the line across the fan to account for channel avulsion. So we don't know if the channel will avulse, but we make a simplistic assumption that it could anywhere in that fan area. And then finally, we can take all these results and we can incorporate it within our broader hazard and risk analysis to calculate risk. So in this example, for the same Kaikoura district plan, we've calculated annual individual fatality risk, and we've adopted different runout probability of exceedance values, so 50%, 90%, etc., for wet and dry open slope avalanches. And we can combine these different scenarios, and we can also change our assumption in these scenarios. So we can assume that this is a 50% probability of runout exceedance, and this is an 84% probability of runout exceedance. And we can use that to calculate our risk, but also to show the uncertainty that's inherent in our risk calculations. And that's really the note I wanted to end on. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please get in contact.